Hello, good evening. Today I'm going to carry on talking about ethics and interpreting, and this is a really important, very critical issue and a very sensitive issue, especially if there is an issue of, I mean, you don't want to take sides, and you're not trying to take sides, but it might appear that you are. For example, you have to be careful in your terminology, for example. Let's say you are actually interpreting about something about the Arabian Gulf. And there was some issue about the Arabian Gulf as a term, because the Arab delegates were saying Arabian Gulf, but the English delegates were saying Persian Gulf. And here it's a problem, and it started to be a bit of an issue. I think it was in 2013, where one party was saying Arabian Gulf in Arabic, the other party is saying Persian Gulf in English. Here, I think what is important is, I mean, in the end, it was settled, the issue was settled that it is the Gulf, just to say the Gulf. Anytime they say the Arabian Gulf, you say the Gulf. When they say Persian Gulf, you say the Gulf because you're referring to the same area. But it can be interpreted in a very strange way, because if they say Persian Gulf and you say Al-Khalij al-Farisi in Arabic while you're interpreting, they will find it's very strange for the Arab community who are listening. And if you say Arabian Gulf for the English community who are listening, the delegates, then they will find that you are taking sides and you are actually changing what is well known in English, which is the Persian Gulf. So I think in that case, it's better to research well and maybe settle for something that's very common for both sides. And it was settled at the time, it was the Gulf. So you see, this is unintentional by the interpreter. There's no involvement from the interpreter's point of view, yet it has become really a bit of an issue when you are interpreting it in a different way. The same applies for example, the Israeli Defense Forces, for example, which is called IDF. If you translate that, interpret that and say قوات الدفاع الإسرائيلية تهاجم غزة, for example, of course those who are listening to you from the Arab community would say, huh? قوات الدفاع الإسرائيلية? How come? And they would not know. But if you are saying to say الجيش الإسرائيلي, then they will know. But that's how the concept itself, or the common concept, is in the target language. Of course, here, if you are saying قوات الدفاع الإسرائيلية, or if you translate the Israeli army to the English people, and they know, the English people, that it is IDF, then it is a bit of an issue. So here it's a problem of only just the term itself. Well, you have to settle that. You have to make sure that you research it well before you go in. And you need to know what it means to the target audience, because the target audience are the ones who are listening to you to understand what's going on and to understand the point of view of the other party. Another element, I mean, this is to do with research, of course, beforehand, when you go and do the research before you go into the booth in order to interpret for somebody. The same applies when you are actually in court, when you are interpreting in court. And let's say, I remember at one time there was a tribunal, and in that one, the lady who was being asked in the actual court by the doctor, medical doctor, about her medical condition, that it does not require to take all these medications that she presented to the court. And then she started crying. Now, if it's a woman interpreter next to her and saw that girl crying, then it becomes a little bit of a problem if she cuddles her or say calms her down or whatever, because they will think that the interpreter is taking sides now with the accused or with the client or with the person who's the claimant, if she's claiming something. So it's a bit of an issue here. It's involved in that. So you have to have strong nerves, really, in order to, you don't express your emotions there, because you're not supposed to be taking sides on either side. And you'll find very strange kind of situations in court as well, as an interpreter. Because I remember once a young man was actually taking his father to court to claim from his father rent for a house which the son owns. And this is a very strange situation here, where he is claiming from his father rent in front of the court. So this is really, I mean, these kind of awkward situations, of course you don't go and discuss them because it's for a matter of confidentiality, of course. And that is one of the most important parts of interpreting, is to be keeping confidentiality as much as possible. I remember there was a film called The Interpreter, and please watch it if you can, where the interpreter, while he was listening to the speakers, heard or overheard about an assassination of one of the presidents at the time in the UN at that time. And that's what in the fictional film happening. And he was and the interpreter, so she's trying to tell everybody that this is what's being done and there's a conspiracy and so on. So you see, the interpreter is in a very sensitive situation and trying to be as objective as possible, but at the same time you don't want to get involved. That's the issue here, which is a big problem. At another occasion, there was I think it's an Islamic conference in Iran. It was held last time, and the interpreters who are coming from the government of Iran, interpreting for Persian, Iranian language, to other languages, to English, and this is what's called relay interpreting. In other words, the interpreters, the government interpreters, will interpret into English, and other interpreters will take from the English and interpret into other languages. So what happened is that the government interpreters, who were employed by the government to come and interpret for that conference, the Iranian government, they actually were told that every time there is Bahrain mentioned, please mention whenever Syria is mentioned, mention Bahrain instead. So they were doing that, and then after that, Bahrain complained about this matter, and then it has become really a big issue. You see, this touches on the integrity of the interpreter. You are not supposed to be really changing any of the message that you are listening to, no matter whether it's pro, against, or with, in your case, against your beliefs or with your beliefs. You are not supposed to actually be involved in the argument itself. So you have to be careful and not to actually be involved in any way, this way or the other way, i.e. not taking sides, not being prejudiced in any way. Because in actual fact, you are trying to actually communicate between two parties, and you are really needs to be invisible, not the third party, and not to be involved, not to be advocating one argument and against another, one argument from one party against another from another party. You're not. You're just being as transparent as possible so that you don't get involved in any way in the argument whatsoever. Also, there are situations where it is quite embarrassing at times for an interpreter. I remember one of the interpreters who was doing interpreting from one of the Scandinavian languages, the Prime Minister of Scandinavia, of one of the countries, I think Denmark maybe. He was talking about something political while he was talking, and the interpreter was interpreting for him. And then all of a sudden, the Prime Minister have changed the subject somehow. So the interpreter wants to understand what's going on. And so he waited until he understands what he's listening to, because he wants to know what the Prime Minister is trying to drive at. Where is he going? Because he needs to know what is that relevance of that information to what it's being said earlier, because you need to make consistency as an interpreter. So he waited for a little bit, the interpreter, and realized that the Prime Minister is actually telling a joke. Okay, he realized that when almost the joke is finished by the Prime Minister. So now he wants to interpret it, but he doesn't have time to interpret it, of course. So what did he say? He said to the audience, the interpreter said to the audience, the Prime Minister said the joke, please laugh. And everybody laughed. So you really, I mean, this is quite a, very intuitive, very, I mean, this is, comes as part of the intelligence, being intelligent as an interpreter and being, on the move, really, as fast as you can, as, you can interpret very quickly and do that well. So this is really one of these elements where you feel that, yes, I am an interpreter and I'm only interpreting what this guy is saying, okay? I'm not no more no less. And in the kind of joke, when the Prime Minister has said the joke, of course, the interpreter cannot actually just interpret the words. As I said earlier, you need to listen to the words, you need to understand what the person is trying to drive at. And sometimes, according to Chernov, who is one of the well-known scholars in interpreting, he was actually saying that you need to be following the interpreter, the speech acts, i.e., there's, you know what speech acts are? Locution, which is the utterance itself, and illocution, which is the intention of the speaker, and perlocution, what is the effect of that on the audience. And in fact, he managed to get that, the perlocution, which is the effect. He made everybody laughs, and that it is a joke. And of course, the audience didn't know what the joke is about, but they know that he was talking about something political, and he moved on and to give a joke in order to augment what he's trying to say, and that's what the effect is. The effect worked. In another occasion, actually, another interpreter who was in one of the excellencies, high excellency, which is a prince or emir at the time, and he was in the Gulf states, and he was saying, he asked the press in the press conference, he says, okay, anybody would like to ask me any questions? And this is what the press conference is about. Usually you find some of these press people stand up, and press people and people who are attending public, they're asking questions and they're open to questions, which is a press conference. So the interpreter was standing, of course, away, a little bit away from the emir, so the guy who is in the audience in a press conference stood up. And he says, and he started swearing at the emir. He was swearing at him in a very bad way. Here, the interpreter is a problem here for the interpreter. The interpreter needs to actually say what this guy is saying. But then, he swore at him a few words, and then he sat down. So the emir turned around to the interpreter to see what this person's question is. And the actual interpreter says to him, he says things that, he says, قال كلاما لا يليق بمقامك. So in other words, he said it in a very diplomatic way, euphemistically saying he said things that are not nice to you in attendance, being in attendance. So you see, these situations that occur are unexpected, and interpreters don't know what to expect when they are actually interpreting, because you are interpreting other people's views, other people's ideas, and you don't know their stance, their attitudes towards a certain political or social event or whatever event is there. So you need to actually be ready for that, and at the same time you don't want to take sides as well, okay, because that is really a bit of an issue for you. I hope that this kind of glimpse into the interpreting world can give you an idea what kind of situation you come across. I mean, sometimes there is another occasion where there is a young guy who was a refugee at the time, and he was telling his story of how he actually immigrated, or how he has illegally immigrated to another country, and then he was saying about his ways of how he transport. His means of transport was the ship. He was in the ship for 2 weeks, and so on and so forth. And then he went into a van, and he was left. He was left in the middle of nowhere, and so on. So he was trying to when he was being interviewed by the immigration officer at the time, or by the social services at the time. They were actually trying to find out some of the truth, but of course sometimes he was not saying the truth. So they wanted to ask the interpreter, sometimes they might ask the interpreter for whether it's true or not. But then of course the interpreter should not be in a situation where they can actually air their views about this situation, because you don't know what kind of, it can be detrimental to the young man. You don't know what kind of, so you don't need to pass any judgments on either side of the argument, and you need to keep as much as possible, as objective as possible, and you need to research well the terms in both languages so that you can come up with the best one. For example, and you also need to make sure that you use the terms correctly. For example, I remember a couple of weeks back, the Arabian Sea, the translator or the interpreter has said it as Al-Bahr al-Arabi, and there is no Al-Bahr al-Arabi in this Oman Sultanate. It is actually the Sea of the Arabs, which is Al-Bahr al-Arab. So this is what it is known in Arabic, and that's what you need to be doing. Again, if you are talking about Palestinian areas, like for example Khalil is known in English as Hebron. So Hebron in English, but in Arabic Al-Khalil. So you need to make sure that you have actually researched it well before you went in. Jericho, for example, Ariha. And for example, Jabal Tariq, Gibraltar. And Seville, Ishbilia. And Granada, Granata. And, Lisbon, Lishbona. And Caspian Sea, Bahr Qazwin. So you see, all of these words that you need to actually research them as well. Locations, names of people, Recep, for example, its Recep in Turkish is Rajab. So you see, you have to make sure that these names are well read in the target language to other people who know who this person is. You need to research the name and the title of the person to know if that is, and for example, Jose, which is written as Jose in English, but it's read as Jose or Jose, and Jorge, for example, for Jorge. These are Spanish names or Swedish names. You need to research them well in order not to actually make a confusion and mention people's names incorrectly. So you need to research it well, and you need not to take sides, as I said before, and you need, when you are researching them well, so that you don't upset either party, because they might think that you are taking sides by either party and you are not. And that is really one of the issues that becomes very, very embedded into the political arena's language, in the political language itself, because it's always, they're using it in a very euphemistically or diplomatically. They use these things so that it will not be, you have to keep to the same kind of tone that they are using, and not to be involved in getting it more emotional or making very upset, because sometimes it's very upsetting in situations that you are interpreting. So if you take sides because you are feeling pity or sympathizing for one side because they are poor or whatever, it becomes really problematic for you. So you really have this kind of tension inside you as an interpreter, but you still have to keep your beliefs to yourself and not to get involved in any way. Even though, I mean, I would say that you will, in a way, you might get involved in the way you choose the words that you are actually interpreting. Because when you are saying Al-Jaysh al-Israeli, if you say Israeli army, Al-Jaysh al-Israeli for the Arabs is an acceptable term. But if you say Quwat al-Difa al-Israeliya to the Arab community, they will think that you are actually taking sides with the Israelis. And the same applies with the Israelis, the same thing. So you see, that is really situations. That's where the interpreter is. You are not going into a kind of always a friendly kind of atmosphere where all it's amicable environment. I mean, these are people who would like to put their views, and they are very convincing in their views as well. You know, they have their evidence, they provide evidence, and you need to be as convincing as they are in the way they put forward that. And Nigel Farage, for example, in the European Brussels, European Parliament at the time, he was very anti-European in his views at that time, and everybody was laughing at him in the Parliament, and I think that was a couple of years back. And but he was very serious. He stood up and he was talking, and everybody was laughing at his own views. But then he did actually put forward his view in a very serious way, in a very convincing way, and he was also telling other people in the parliament that they are not professionals and they are not, you know, I mean, he's saying things that makes them laugh because they are professionals and they are, but he's saying you are not professionals and you don't know what is, you know, he was trying. So of course the speaker in the house at the time told him to be more respectful to his colleagues, and it went well in the end. But of course he put forward his views and his argument in a very persuasive manner, and of course the answers from the members of the parliament as well to him were also just as convincing and as persuasive. So here, as an interpreter, you have to be, when you are interpreting, you have to be just as persuasive as the speaker that you're listening to, who are inputting in your ear the information which you need to actually produce. But also, I mean, that is part of your personality. You have to have strong personality, good character, you know, understanding other people's views and taking them on, and, you know, expect the unexpected, as they say. You know, that's what's going to happen in interpreting as well. I wish you a very good evening.